Hello my dear students and welcome to your favorite educational YouTube channel English वाली मैम. So आज हमारी OTT series by day 54 know how to get the perfect score का episode 20 है and आज के episode में we are going to be reading the chapter from your supplementary reader which has the same name as your supplementary reader, that is Footprints Without Feet. And before we start with the revision of the chapter, I want to remind all of you that once we are done with the revision of the literature section, I am going to disclose some examiner's secret with all of you, and after that you will also be told about the roadmap towards getting the perfect score. And of course day 53 जो है उसमें तो आपको मैम एक एब्सोल्यूट प्लान बताएगी ही, but as ma'am has been telling you that you can only implement that absolute plan if you are watching our videos regularly. So do like, share and subscribe to English Wali ma'am. Okay, so now let us start with the revision of the chapter. So this story, basically Footprints Without Feet, is actually based in London. Okay, here you can see the flow chart that I have made. So let us start with the flow chart. So it says two boys, they see fresh muddy footprints on the streets or outside the street of a house. And while they are looking at those footprints, what happens? A fresh footmark appears and the boys follow it, but it suddenly disappears. So this is how the story starts. So these footprints, whom did they belong to? This was Griffin, a scientist who had discovered how to make the human body transparent. Alright, and so we know that Griffin was a scientist, but how was he in day-to-day life? For that I want all of you to come to page number 26. And ma'am has been reminding you that whenever you're watching our video, please make sure that you have the textbook handy. जो भी chapter ma'am पढ़ा रही हो उसकी textbook आपके पास होनी चाहिए. Okay, so on page number 26, I want all of you to come to the last paragraph which says brilliant scientist. Okay, brilliant scientist though he was, Griffin was rather a lawless person. His landlord disliked him and tried to eject him. In revenge, Griffin set fire to the house. To get away without being seen, he had to remove his clothes. Thus, it was that he became a homeless wanderer without clothes, without money and quite invisible, until he happened to step in some mud and left footprints as he walked. So in general life, he of course was a brilliant scientist that he made this remarkable discovery. But as a person, he was completely mannerless or lawless, and he was someone who was also very impatient. That when the landlord said that I do not want you in my house, what did he do? He put the entire house on fire. At the clothing store. So now what happens is that it was the winter time of the season in London, and of course winters out there are extremely cold. So there's a line in your chapter which says that Griffin had chosen the wrong time of the year. So as we just read the last passage on page number 26, that he was without clothes, he was without money, he was without home, and of course because it was extremely cold, he wanted some clothes to warm himself. So on page number 27, I want all of us to read the second paragraph. It says, closing time arrived, and as soon as the doors were shut, Griffin was able to give himself the pleasure of clothing and feeding himself without regard to expense. Why? Because no one could really see him. So he broke open boxes and wrappers and fitted himself out with warm clothes. with shoes, an overcoat and a white brimmed hat, he became a fully dressed and visible person. So he was able to manage clothes for himself. Then, in the kitchen of the restaurant, he found cold meat and coffee, and he followed up the meal with sweets and wine taken from the grocery store. So he was able to manage his meal as well, which further helped him keep his body warm. And finally, he settled down to sleep on a pile of quilts. But what happens the next day? So Griffin had managed to wake up in good time. All might have been well if he would have, been able to wake up well in time. But that didn't happen. In fact, by the time he woke up, the assistants at the store, they had come for work. And when he saw a couple of them, what did he do? He panicked and began to run. And of course, what happened? That he realized that the only way to escape from being caught, he decided to put off his clothes. Now he of course started feeling all the more cold. So now he runs to a theatrical company, where what happens, because he thinks that this is the place where I can steal the costumes very easily. But what happens? So he made made his way invisible upstairs and came out a little water, wearing bandages round his forehead. And to escape without being seen, he callously attacked the shopkeeper from behind, after which he robbed him all of the money he could find. So, and at the theatrical company, he hoped for finding not only clothes but also something that would hide the empty space above his shoulders. So shivering with cold, he hurried to Drury Lane, the center of the theatre world, where he got those bandages. Alright. And of course, he was able to rob the shopkeeper. So again, it proves that he was a lawless person, because he was also involved in theft if the situation required to. So now he wanted to escape from all of this mess. So he goes to the village of Arping. So what happens there? So he goes to an inn, where the owner of that particular inn, they find the arrival of a visitor at this time of the year very unusual, and this was owned by Mrs. Hall and Mr. Hall. So what happens in this particular inn? So we are on page number 28. The second last paragraph. Shortly afterwards, a curious episode occurred. Very early in the morning, a clergyman and his wife were awakened by noises in the study. Creeping downstairs, they heard the chink of money being taken from the clergyman's desk. Without making any noise and with a poker grasped firmly in his hand, the clergyman flung open the door and he said, "Surrender." But to his amazement, and he realized that the room appeared to be empty. So what was the scientist, what was Griffin actually doing? He was again stealing money from the clergyman. So what did he do? He immediately opened the door of the study, but then he saw, or what he could see was that the room was empty. And he and his wife looked under the desk, behind the curtains, even up there in the chimney, but there wasn't anyone. Extraordinary affair, the clergyman kept saying for the rest of the day. But it was not as extraordinary as the behavior of Mrs. Hall's furniture a little later in that morning. So what had happened? The landlord and his wife, they came up early and they were surprised to see the scientist's door. It was wide open, because generally it was shut and locked. So they tried to peep, or they tried to check his room, that who exactly is this person. So the bedclothes were cold, showing that the scientist must have been up for some time, and stranger still, the clothes and the bandages that he always wore were lying all about in the room. And suddenly Mrs. Hall, she heard a sniff to her ear, and what happened? The hat on the bedpost leapt up and dashed itself into her face like this. And then what happened? The furniture, it became alive. The bedroom chair came alive. It was springing up in the air. And when her husband turned away in terror, the extraordinary chair pushed them both out of the room and then appeared to slam and lock the door after them. And Mr. and Mrs. Hall, they were completely clueless as to what they saw, and they came downstairs running, shouting and howling for help. Now while all of this was happening, now this news had spread into the village, and people thought that this was some kind of witchcraft. But on page number 29, the third last paragraph, but witchcraft or not, the third last paragraph, second line, but witchcraft or not, all of you are able to see this? When news of the burglary at the clergyman's home became known, the strange scientist was strongly suspected of having a hand in it. Why? Because the news of a scientist performing some kind of mischief had been spread. And what happened now? Efforts to catch Griffin. The village constable was secretly sent for. So instead of waiting for the constable, Mrs. Hall, she went to the scientist who had somehow mysteriously appeared from this empty bedroom. And I want to know what you have been doing to my chair upstairs, she demanded. And I want to know how it is you came out of an empty room and how you entered a locked room. So the scientist was quick-tempered, was impatient. I just told you that how he set his landlord's house on fire. So he said that you don't understand who or what I am. And he says, I will show you. So what did he do? He threw off the bandages and whiskers and the spectacles and even nose. It took him only a minute to do this, and they found that there was a headless man, if you can see this picture here. And Mr. Jaffers, the constable, now arrived and was quite surprised to find that he had to arrest a man without head. But he was easily prevented from doing his duty, that if a magistrate's warrant ordered a person's arrest, then that person has to be arrested with or without the head. And then there followed a remarkable scene as the policeman tried to hold a man who was becoming more and more invisible as he threw off one garment after the another, and finally a shirt flew into the air, and the constable found himself struggling with someone he could not see at. So many people tried to catch Griffin, but they were unable to, because from transparent he had now become completely invisible. And Jaffers was knocked unconscious, and there were nervous, excited cries of hold him, but this was easier said than done. Griffin had shaken himself free, and no one knew where to lay hands on him. So this is a story by H.G. Wells. Now you might be wondering कि मैम आपने सारे episodes हमने पढ़ के सुनाए हैं. Of course there is a reason. Specifically the episode at the village of Iping, because this is where the story gets all the more interesting. Okay, so I hope all of you have understood the story. और क्या character sketch समझने की ज़रूरत है? चलो आपकी happiness, आपके convenience के लिए मैम एक बारी आपको character sketch जो है उसके main points बता देती हैं. However, I have read it from the book itself. So we know that there is only one main character in the story. And who is this character? This is Griffin the scientist. Right? So what are his character traits? First, of course, that he is a brilliant scientist. See, I am picking up words from NCERT only. Alright. Then he was lawless. That is, he was not law abiding. And of course, third is impatient. And of course, we have discussed, the examples for all these character traits of Griffin the scientist. Understood the chapter? We will meet in the next episode. Till then, do like, share and subscribe to English Wali Ma'am. All the best.